This is Kathleen Ashton. I am pleased to be able to host an interview for the Ohio Psychological Association Oral History Project with Dr. Catherine Gaw. Today is June 3rd, 2015, and our interview with Dr. Gaw continues our focus on OPA past presidents. Dr. Gaw was OPA president from 2010 until 2011, and part of her legacy has been contributing to the gathering of OPA's Oral History Project and the OPA 60th Anniversary Celebration. As such, I'm honored to be conducting her interview today. Dr. Gaw graduated from the Wright State School of Professional Psychology in Dayton, Ohio, and completed her internship at the Mendota Mental Health Institute in Madison, Wisconsin. Her early career included work as a staff psychologist at the Children's Treatment Unit of the Mendota Mental Health Institute and in private practice, the Midwest Center for Human Services. Dr. Gaw's contributions also included serving as a consultant to the Clinical Psychology Training Program at the University of Wisconsin and a clinical assistant professor in the University of Wisconsin Medical School Department of Psychiatry. She served on the Board of Governors for the Wisconsin Society of Clinical and Consulting Psychologists before moving to Ohio in 1999. Dr. Gaw has been a staff psychologist at the Cleveland Clinic since 1999, specializing in child psychology. She is a member of numerous professional societies, including the Autism Society of America, the American Psychological Association, and the Association for Play Therapy. She is a fellow of the American Orthopsychiatric Association. She has made significant contributions to the Cleveland Psychological Association as president, board member, advocacy and interprofessional relations chair, and a representative to the Ohio Psychological Association. The Ohio Psychological Association has been honored to have Dr. Gaw as an integral member of the board of directors. Dr. Gaw has served as chair of the Mandatory Continuing Education Committee and co-chaired the Education and Membership Committees. She represented OPA several times at the State Leadership Conference and served on the APA Committee of State Leaders. Dr. Gaw served as the Ohio Psychological Association president from 2010 until 2011 and was instrumental in the planning of OPA's successful 60th anniversary celebration. Her dedication to OPA and furthering the profession of psychology in Ohio has continued with her work on the OPA Oral History Project. I am honored to be talking to Cathy today about her contribution to OPA and psychology. Welcome, Dr. Gaw.
Thank you. It's a very generous introduction.
Well deserved. So, tell us a little bit about how you first got interested in psychology.
Wow. I think my interest was originally and remains in people. I think people are pretty amazing, and I like the idea of helping people along their journey. And so, kind of a funny story, as I was growing up, the popular people helpers in the media were nuns. So, Sound of Music, missionaries that would go into, other countries. And so I decided when I was probably in third grade that I was going to have to be a nun. And my mother informed me that in order to be a nun I needed to be Catholic, which we were not. So my career path was dashed.
That did not work out.
But I think I had a really wonderful psychology class in high school, and our teacher was a little bit kooky. We had the class over Valentine's Day, and so instead of a heart, she said, well, we don't really love with our hearts, we love with our brains. So she brought a big brain cookie in for all. But she also took us to a number of different kinds of places to see how different people live and work. And we went to a drug rehab halfway house, and developmentally disabled residential facility for children, a couple different places like that that were just very different from each other, but again, just really exciting to see what people were doing to help people better their lives. And so I wanted to do what I could with that, and psychology seemed like the best way to do it because there's good research behind it. It's a flexible field, so although I have yet to be bored, I figured if I got bored with one area of psychology, there were many more that I could move into if I needed to. So.
Okay, great. Tell me a little bit more about your career journey in psychology.
Well, I got my bachelor's degree at the University of Illinois, and at the time, PsyD programs had just, I think there were 2 in the country at the time. And one was at University of Illinois. And what was happening was that in order for PsyD programs to demonstrate their worth, they had to be a PhD program plus all the extra clinical focus. And so PsyD programs were having to attend graduate school much longer than PhD psychologists. One of the experiments that University of Illinois did was to see if they could do kind of a mini PsyD at a bachelor's level and see if that would make bachelor's in psychology more marketable. And that was a specialized program our junior and senior year. And so I enrolled in that. I was accepted into that program, and we had practicums and that kind of thing. It was great fun. It was really wonderful. At University of Illinois, it's a huge school, as OSU is, and so we rarely had contact with professors until getting into this program, and then working right with them, and it was really fun, and helping the graduate students do their research. So we had a little taste of everything. But I also felt that I really needed to work in the real world before I went to graduate school. So I did find that although going through the mental health workers program, which is what they called it, helped me feel more confident and more capable in working with people, it did nothing for my marketability. I was able to get jobs that high school graduates got, which was fine. I worked in a group home. I did volunteer work with different organizations, and so I really wanted to kind of experience the real world for 2 or 3 years, and I did that. And then I happened to come back to Ohio, and at the time learned about this great new PsyD program that had just started in Dayton a few years before that, and thought, well, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want to do. And I went out and interviewed, and I was very fortunate to be accepted into the class of 1988, and a wonderful class. We still get together for reunions. A number of us have kept in touch, and it was probably the best experience of my life. It felt like it was a family of friends. We really helped each other through, and we were all very different from each other. That was one of the things that appealed to me, was it was a program that really supported diversity, and we were a class that really worked with. I think we really used it well. So,
who are some of your mentors at Wright State?
Well, this is interesting because there were a few female staff, and of course, not enough to go around, as in any minority, and at that time, women in psychology were a minority. And so I wasn't able to connect with any of them for my certain committees and that kind of thing, which is interesting because I really identified probably from high school on as having some pretty strong feminist leanings. So that was a little frustrating for me, but I also understood when a couple of them said there's not enough of me to go around, and okay, I get it. There was a wonderful instructor in the developmental psychology program who taught at SOPP, and his name was Larry Kurdick. And he was wonderful. And so I would say he was probably my strongest mentor and friend. Just getting through the program, keeping a healthy attitude about everything, healthy perspective about everything. He was on my dissertation committee and forced me to turn it in, even though I did not feel like it was perfect yet. And that's a big job. Two other people who were on my committee who were really important to me: Jim Webb, who had started the program for gifted children, and Jim Dobbins, who just in this last year retired from the School of Professional Psychology. And there were a number of other people. I think the way that the program was set up, we also had students who came in with advanced degrees, and so there were a number of students in the program who were mentors as well, and then of course people at our practicum sites. So it was just a very invigorating, exciting, wonderful time, and we had amazing deans at our program at the time. Ron Fox was the head dean, and we had Jim Webb was another dean. We had I'm blocking on his name. We had Russ Barkley, Russ Bent. Russ Bent was a character. We would have talent shows, and he always did a magic act. He was a hoot. So those were our deans. So we also learned quite a bit about APA, about the history of psychology, about the territory of psychology versus psychiatry, different things like that. So I just felt like it was an incredibly valuable education, and I was just really, really fortunate to be there when I was.
That's great. And then you brought yourself back to Ohio.
Yeah.
And became involved in associations like the Ohio Psychological Association, Cleveland Psych Association.
Got involved with OPA when I was a graduate student, and I remained a member when I was in Wisconsin. And in fact, it was interesting because when I got involved with the Wisconsin Board of Governors, I brought in the OPA newsletter. I don't even remember what they called it at the time, and I said, now why can't we be publishing something like this? So even then, OPA was influencing other state associations, and I know that our executive directors knew each other, but that just kind of strikes me as funny when I think back. I came back and worked at the clinic, and actually I came back because Vanessa Jensen, who at the time was the director of pediatric psychology, and she had been at Wright State a couple of years ahead of me, and her husband and I were in the same class at SOPP, so we had remained close friends through the years, and she had contacted me when the clinic started hiring child psychologists, less research focus and more clinical focus in the family health centers. And it just happened to be at a really good time in my personal and professional life. When you work at a hospital for 10 years, they expect you then to move into administration, and my love is clinical work, so it was time to move on. So I came out here, and it's been a great place to be.
Oh, that's great. And how did you get reconnected with OPA? It sounds like you never lost connection, but how did you get more involved?
I think I have Vanessa to thank for that. I immediately attended the conference, and at that time I think they were having it in the spring and the fall. And I remember walking up to the sign-in table and seeing Cathy Mack, who had been 2 or 3 years ahead of me in the program and had kind of been one of my idols, and I was like, oh, it's Cathy Mack. And so she was talking to Michael Randy, and I ran over and said hello to them. And then I mentioned to Vanessa, she had been president of OPA, I think right before I moved here, and mentioned to her that I was interested in getting involved in a committee, and she was interested in moving off the MCE committee. So she said, would you like to take my place there? I said sure, and I guess it just kind of evolved from there. I'm still on the committee, and now I'm chairing it with Beth, although Beth is the director and she's really in charge. But
why do you think it's important to be a part of professional associations?
I wish more programs talked about this, because I think I was raised in my graduate program understanding this, but I think there are a number of reasons why it's important. I think one is just to understand who we are in the context of things. The other is to understand the business of psychology and what other important pieces go into it. So legislation, insurance, what is this territorial debate supposedly between psychiatry and psychology, and does it really exist, or is it just certain personalities that talk about it in that way? So all of those things I think are really important to a practice, and to also be able to inform clients and patients what sort of mental health person they may be looking for, because it doesn't necessarily always have to be a psychologist, but in some cases it would be very important to be. So I guess I just feel really strongly about staying connected and knowing what's going on and being able to share that with my colleagues, and keeping the profession vibrant and alive and growing.
So we know OPA is recognized nationally as a state association. What's special about OPA? Well,
I've only experienced 2 state associations, and I think that the Wisconsin Board of Governors and that association was in a state of flux at the time that I was involved. Because I think maybe a year or 2 later they became the Wisconsin Psychological Association. But what I find I don't know if it's unique, but it's special about OPA is the creativity, the energy, the again, focus on diversity, although to look at pictures of our membership, it wouldn't look like there's a lot of diversity. I think that it is taken very seriously. I was always impressed by the professional workshops, professional level of workshops and education that they were offering psychologists in Ohio, and I've been to other presentations by other associations and have not been as impressed. So I guess I felt like OPA takes psychology and psychologists and also consumers of psychology seriously, and wants to do the best thing.
Great. can you tell me a little bit about some of your mentors at OPA?
Well, sure. I think through the years when I was in Wisconsin, hearing about OPA from Vanessa. So she also had done a lot with Sandy Schulman and Alice Randolph and Suzanne LaSure and David Hayes. And so although those are people I haven't worked with directly, I felt like they had contributed a lot to my understanding of how things have happened. When I became involved in leadership at OPA, I think David Hayes was one of my most active mentors, and I also think that Lynn Rustad was very instrumental in just challenging me and asking me questions and being very supportive, and yeah, I think I would identify those two as.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about your year as president of OPA.
Well, that was interesting. I really didn't feel able to even consider running for president until I could shift my thinking to it being a position of service, and I think that that is more accurate. I think I've gotten, because we've had superstars as OPA president before, it really felt to me like that isn't me, that isn't where I could be, but when it occurred to me, when somebody mentioned something about, well, but we need, what you do, and oh, well, I can do that. So I would say my year was really, there weren't large issues or problems going on at the time, but what I felt had happened was there'd been kind of an evolution from LGBT committee becoming a subcommittee and promoting the diversity committee, so promoting ethnic diversity in a stronger way. That had been really strong and had been done really well for a number of years, and so I felt like it was kind of coming to the point where we needed to open it up a little more and start talking about diversity on a number of levels, and how can we maintain the areas of diversity that we already were supporting, but also help ourselves be more aware of how we might refer to people and not realize that our colleague could be one of those people. I think one example is Democrats and Republicans, and we can get carried away talking about one or the other, but we're all at the table, and it's important to respect that. So I guess that was probably my biggest focus. So it was, I don't know what your experience was being on the board at that time, but I think my experience was I wanted to facilitate more conversation and more thinking about these kinds of things, and how can we open the doors and really be open to psychologists from all over the state.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a focus, and really opening up that conversation and making that a vital part of every board meeting.
Yeah.
Which was, I think, a great contribution.
Well, thank you. I know a few people at the end of the year said, well, we have to talk about this again.
Which means we probably need to talk about it again.
Yeah.
It's usually a pretty good signal. So do you see that as kind of your legacy of your presidential year, or can you think of any other things that you feel like, hey, that's something that I contributed?
I think my larger contribution probably came out of my taking on the chair of the 60th anniversary committee, and that was a total fluke. It was the year before my presidency, but what had happened was Suzanne LaSure was in charge of the 60th anniversary celebration at convention, and then she was chosen to be on the licensing board, and so she had to stop her connections with OPA. So all of a sudden, months before this thing is supposed to happen, everybody's panicking and saying, who's going to take this on? And so I kind of came into it being told that there was a committee, and then when I said, okay, I'll do it, then it's like, okay, who would you like on your committee? Oops. And we ended up with an amazing committee. We ended up with a whole range of psychologists and wonderful staff. Of course, Michael Randy and Bobby Celeste were on the committee. We had Katie Crabtree Thomas, and I think that was her last year with OPA. So that was a delight. Denise Brenner, and then Dan Sanders, who had been a past president, Terry Madura, who was a student at University of Akron, Dick Reinierson, who has continued on with the oral history project that evolved out of that, Lynn Rustad, Rosemary Shaw, I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, but it was a really great group. And so we kind of split up things, but one of the projects that really took hold, I think, in all of our hearts was we were doing video interviews of a number of different psychologists. And again, we were trying to capture past presidents. We were asking specifically in relation to 60 years of OPA and their thoughts about that. And so I went back to my people from School of Psychology and interviewed Ron Fox and Jack Wiggins and Jim Webb, and did a wonderful interview with David Rogers, talking about the licensing law, and it was just so incredible to hear these people so very passionate about the things that they had been involved in, and it was amazing to hear the stories, because I think we don't realize how far our profession has come. I mean, to even think we didn't have licenses. There are, people currently living in Ohio who have single-digit licenses. That's pretty incredible, and the fight that it had to take to do that. I also was able to interview who is it from the clinic, Mike McKee, yeah, and talking about how he and David Rogers had worked so hard just to have psychologists acknowledged as staff, which at that time were only the medical physicians, and so and it's incredible to be part of this organization and be taken seriously, and we have them to thank for that.
So that was the beginning of the Oral History Project.
That was the beginning, and once we continued it then after the 60th anniversary, because we realized that we had this amazing footage. And so then we started organizing around that and talking with, there's a gentleman in APA who's in charge of oral history there. Well, it wasn't oral history, but he was interviewing and then writing these things. I think he actually published a book just prior to our starting this. So Wade Pickren is his name, and he was really helpful, and just trying to find out what other associations are doing. There were no other state associations that were doing anything like that, but there were some other groups in the country that were doing things for their professional associations. So it's just been a wonderful project, and it's been ongoing now since 2010. And I have to say that every interview I have done, I have left being so inspired and so proud, and often have big tears in my eyes, because they're just amazing, what people have done for us and in the world, and the various experiences that we've had. It's just really, really special. So.
Can you give us an example of some of the lessons that you've learned from talking to these psychologists?
Sure. Let's see. Although I had heard the story a number of times while I was in the professional school, it was really fun to interview Ron Fox and have him again talk about the journey that they went through to get the professional school dreamed up, agreed to by the legislature. I mean, I had no idea that it would be such a truly political thing, and all the different connections of people that so I think for me there again was a lesson of how we are all connected, and the fact that he had been connected with all these different groupings and had been a significant contributor. I think they were willing to listen to him, and they also saw that he lived what he said. And so to set up a program that was a PsyD program, and also a program that was really committed to diversity, and especially ethnic diversity, where at the time other students of color were not being accepted to graduate programs, or were being judged harshly because they weren't able to come in with some of the training and experiences that Caucasian students had had. It was a really big deal, and so that was really exciting to hear that, perseverance and connections and living by your convictions. I recently did an interview with Willie Williams, and what really struck me in my interview with him was that we have come to a point in history where all of the connections and things that he's been doing through his professional life are kind of coming to fruition. And so he's an African American psychologist who has really fought hard to be a psychologist, to open the doors wider for African American men and women to become psychologists. He's worked with police departments, he's worked with the juvenile justice system, and so here we are in Cleveland, calling into question how the police department handles profiling and what kind of training the police department has received, and these things are really happening, and it's so exciting to see him being able to get involved in this, because he, I think, has laid the foundation for these things to happen. He's been part of that. So again, kind of, I think a lot of times getting validation that, if you follow your heart and you do what's right and you keep doing it. Now his lesson, which I thought was really interesting, is that if you can't get it accomplished in one setting, go to another. And so I think at one point he was kind of sounding like, well, I wish I'd really stuck with one job, but the nature of what he was trying to change, there was no way you could do it from within a system. You could only go so far within each system. But now I think that's all percolating through, and so I think hope is a big message, and that we really do make a really big difference in the world. And that's exciting.
Yeah, those are great lessons to learn. In thinking back, you've done these interviews with these different psychologists. Can you say a little bit more about the journey psychology has made? Like, how do you see how psychology has grown and where it is today?
Well, I think there's been an interesting flow between academia and psychotherapy or clinical work, and over time trying to find a good balance, maintaining a strong scientific base. I think it has been a profession that has taken itself seriously enough to really work on creating and maintaining professional boundaries, whether it's through licensure or setting up a code of ethics. I think it's getting involved in the telehealth guidelines. And again, Ken Drood was somebody that Jane Woodrow and I interviewed, and just to hear him talking about his passion for this is where we're heading, and we need to be able to think ahead and protect our clients and our patients and still do the good work that we do in ways that are safe and won't harm anyone. And so I think that a lot of things have changed, but I think kind of the core values, if you will, have remained. And I like that there's some creativity in this profession, so we're not just hammering out the same widget. I think I'm more of kind of an intuitive person, so I think my description is more emotional rather than factual. But
what do you think the future holds for psychology?
I think it's already happening, but I think that psychology is just part of life, and so I see it being critical, psychology 101 for college students of just about any discipline. I do think that we're heading into an era of both learning more and thinking more about how the brain functions, but also artificial intelligence and what makes a human being. And I think those are all things that psychologists are going to be critically involved in, and hopefully continuing to keep us connected to nature and the earth and taking care of all of this, so that as we figure things out, we can still be around to enjoy the fruits of our labors. But yeah, I think psychology, there is definitely a place for psychology in the world, and I'm not worried about our profession dying in any way. It's going to change, but change is good.
What advice do you have for future psychologists?
I think that it's important to do what you love and what you believe in, and to be able to find that path. And I know that there are many graduate programs that kind of dictate what you can and can't do. There may be jobs and positions, but I think continuing to stay in touch with what's happening in the field can help you find the place where you can really do what you love doing. And I just think it's a great profession. I hope that people who come into this profession in the future are serious about it and will continue to take good care of it as a profession, and continue to learn from the past and to teach the rest of us what they're learning. So.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share about OPA or psychology in Ohio?
Nothing in particular. I felt very privileged and fortunate to be part of OPA and to be able to work alongside so many great people. And I just really appreciate that opportunity.
Well, thank you, Cathy. It's been a pleasure interviewing you and really an honor. And you really contributed a lot to both OPA and psychology in Ohio, and I think some really good insights from your time with OPA that'll be important for people to know about.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I think with that, we'll end things.